And the next thing I want to turn to is kind of, politically how these Democrats are exploiting the El Paso incident, and obviously trying to ignore Dayton, because the Dayton shooter clearly is a leftist. He called himself a leftist, loves Elizabeth Warren, but the Democrat presidential candidates are trying to turn this against President Trump. And I want to call it out as just evil doesn't even seem a strong enough word. We have families you know how it is. Everyone listening to the show, you've lost loved ones in your family, and almost everybody has. You've lost loved ones. It's devastating. It's just a hole in your heart you think will never be filled again. You have all of the things you have to do following the passing of a loved one, and just all of the pain that a family goes through and friends go through, realizing I'll never see my friend again, my mother, my daughter, my husband, whoever that all these people were. In both incidents, this is the real thing that's happening in America. And it's the real thing that pretty much everyone in America ought to be able to recognize is happening around this country. What you have instead out of the left is immediately, before the funerals have even been held, tweets and posts and rantings and interviews, pretty much by all the Democrat presidential candidates, blaming President Trump for these incidents. There is no connection in reality, in rationality, to lay these incidents at the feet of President Trump. None, zip, zero, nada. Yet, I could read you Cory Booker. There's no mustering of will to focus on right-wing white supremacist terror attacks. I agree with him that that white supremacy is a horrible thing. It's complete hogwash to call it right-wing. White supremacy is not right-wing. Racism is not right-wing. Only in the delusional and wishful thinking in the mind of Cory Booker does he try to connect right-wing and white supremacy. And so he rants about it and goes on and on about Trump and Trump's rhetoric. And this is another thing we're going to get to a little bit later in the show, but a huge problem that has to be exposed and called out and talked about more is the media in this country has just saluted like a private saluting to a general. Whatever the left-wing mob in Washington wants to be the narrative is what the media puts out as the narrative. So there's constant reference to President Trump, his dangerous rhetoric, his harsh rhetoric, his hateful rhetoric. And I got to tell you folks, President Trump stays plain spoken. He is not a senatorial style statesman speaker, although he was wonderful today and has been wonderful many other occasions, but he speaks from the heart. He speaks as he sees things. And this is why, among many reasons, why he won the election in 2016, why so many voters are really feel loyal to him, because he calls it like it is. And so whenever, for example, President Trump points out, we have a major problem at the border. We have an insecure border. We're being overrun at the border. This is like an invasion. It is like an invasion. But that was one example of, I think it was Cory Booker called out, when President Trump calls, the crowds at the border an invasion, this is hateful rhetoric. No, it's not. It's not hateful to say things that are true. It's not hateful to point out we have a major problem when you have caravans coming from 4 other countries in Central America and coming through our southern border, marching across all of Mexico and presenting at the southern border and demanding to be let in. You can call it an invasion. Trump doesn't say anything about race, color, ethnicity, national origin. He's just saying people trying to to overrun our border, to bulldoze Border Patrol, to sneak through, that would be an invasion. But that's an example, or Cory Booker saying, that is an example of right-wing hateful rhetoric. There were comments also by, virtually every Democrat presidential candidate. Cory Booker went wild, as did Kamala Harris and, Beto O'Rourke, just all of them. They all piled on, trying to say essentially that these 2 incidents, especially El Paso, is the fault of the president's rhetoric. They're trying to exploit these unfortunate, unbelievably sad, horrific incidents, trying to exploit them for their political advantage. That's what the Democrat presidential candidates are doing. They're taking an incident that had nothing in the world to do with President Trump and to exploit those incidents and to, for their political advantage, try to say, see, I'm running for president. I'd be better because look what happened. And this is all Trump's fault. And honest to goodness, I think a lot of people were thinking, I hope Trump doesn't even respond to them because it's absurd to be blaming him for what happened. But I think I actually liked President Trump's press conference this morning. I thought it was wise to openly say again, of course, we oppose of course, we oppose white supremacy. Of course, it's evil. Of course, it's awful. He talked quite eloquently about the incidents that happened and what we have to do and how we have to come together as a nation. I thought he was really eloquent, and I think he had to respond because the left wing, and again, it's the media mob. It's not really just a few candidates saying things. The media carries this weapon for the Democrats over and over and over and over. They do it because, honest to goodness, folks, if you stop and think about it, what do the Democrats have to run on in this election cycle? The economy is great. The border is getting more secure. Jobs are coming back to America. We're fixing the astounding corruption in Washington slowly. We're getting rid of unburdensome regulation that are allowing businesses to grow and thrive. Every major indicator in our country in terms of the health of our economy is doing better and better and better. The Democrats have nothing to run on, so they are seizing on these instances, both at El Paso and Dayton, but mostly El Paso, as their ticket to this is how I'm going to get relevance and how I'm going to get headlines. I'm going to find the most outrageous thing I can possibly say about President Trump. I'm going to find the most outrageous thing I can possibly say and a way to accuse him or attribute these actions to by these lunatic people to President Trump. It is truly, it's beyond shameful. Beyond shameful. It's just it's such a horrible black mark, really a black eye in the Democrat Party and all of their candidates, that they can't think of anything better to do or talk about than trying to blame President Trump for these horrific incidents. I was going to read you a litany of all the tweets and posts, but I almost don't want to humor them. I don't want to give them and imply they have validity because they're an absurd effort to try to say that because these things happen must be Trump's fault. And I think, as I say, I think Trump was right to speak up again about white supremacy as he has in the past. And one of the things that's very interesting. AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, in several recent interviews, has been asked about things, basically saying, do you think that violence is justified? And it's kind of a funny thing because, for number one, the Dayton shooter mentioned her. He obviously follows AOC. He's taking her concentration camp headline that she tried to say that, restraining people at the border who enter illegally and putting them in, and restraining them in some way, the same way that President Obama did, that somehow Trump did it. It constitutes concentration camps. And someone tried to ask her, hey, don't you think it's a little bit troublesome? I mean, you triggered this guy. You use language like concentration camps, and the guy goes off and shoots up some people in Daytona. Don't you feel responsible? She wouldn't answer that at all, would not answer. But two other things that she has done, I think, really, really bear just a reminder here, because the left is always trying to say they're not the ones that are ever responsible for violence. But AOC was asked in an interview recently, essentially, about violence in Israel and the Palestinians, and she very much justified it. She just said, these are people who have no path forward, nothing else to do. What else are they supposed to do? They're marginalized and marginalized. They don't have a choice, blah, blah, blah. They have no choice but to riot, right? And then there was the Antifa attacker. You remember that story? The Antifa attacker who attacked the ICE facility in Tacoma, Washington, mid-July. And he was very violent, throwing projectiles and explosive devices toward this ICE detention center. And the police actually ended up shooting and killing him. And one reporter asked AOC, you brought so much attention to these detention centers and you're calling ICE evil, blah, blah. Do you feel at all responsible? Do you think it could be partly your responsibility that these people, this guy engaged in this conduct? And she's having none of it. No way. She can stir people up, stir up hatred against the ICE facilities, stir up hatred against the president, hatred against the border patrol. And yet if someone acts on the very thing she's saying, she's like, oh, not my fault, not my fault. Well, I got to tell you, folks, I think this is I want to get to these stories, really to get around to talking a few more serious issues that all kind of grow out of or gel around this issue, what happened over the weekend, these horrific shootings, and how we as an American people handle them. One more point I want to get to has to do with the way the media engages in its conversation. The media is complicit in these actions.